All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Welcome to the September 2018 episode of ShapingEDU Live, focused on building constellations of innovation. I want to thank you all for joining us today for a fun and much needed discussion about solving a common challenge that crops up. And it's when our communities of thought leadership and practice become insular. How do we continuously infuse these communities with new voices from different backgrounds, perspectives, sectors, industries? I'm looking forward to the panelists' ideas and yours. So for all you dreamers, doers, and drivers here today, here's how today's event is going to go. Joining us are several panelists who have expertise in today's theme. Collectively, they represent a range of roles in shaping education. And in just a moment, they'll be introducing themselves. While the chat feature is available for all kinds of free-flowing discussions, we also encourage you to tweet along with the hashtag ShapingEDU. And as a practical matter, I will ask everyone in the audience to keep themselves muted unless speaking. That is not to discourage you from raising your hand or asking a question. It is to eliminate the car alarms, the cats, the dogs, and any other stray noises in the background that may be distractors. And as I mentioned, if you have a question at any point that you want to ask of the panelists or anyone, feel free to raise your hand or ask your question in the chat, and we will absolutely do our best to get to it as quickly as possible. Before I begin, I have a few housekeeping notes to share. First, I want to acknowledge a big development for ShapingEDU. On September 13th, we launched our online community. Everyone who signed up to serve in one of 10 neighborhoods to shape the future of education, including the Building Constellations of Innovation neighborhood, has received instructions for how to access and engage. While the experience is meant to be convenient for asynchronous and global discussions and activities, we are planning a formal live virtual kickoff next week to give folks an overview, set some group goals and expectations, and, you know, no big deal, change the world together. The orientation will be taking place at this exact time next week, 5 p.m. Central US time on Thursday, October 4th. And all neighbors tomorrow will be receiving access info. And yes, it will be recorded and disseminated as always if you can't make it live. And if you're interested in a one-on-one session to learn more about it, I'm happy to provide you with that. And if you have never signed up to serve in one of our change-making ShapingEDU neighborhoods but are wanting to, please visit uto.asu.edu/ShapingEDU for more info, and I'll be sure to put that link in the chat. You are also welcome to attend the upcoming virtual kickoff, even if you're not a part of the neighborhood yet. And again, I'll be sharing deep access details with you soon, and it will be recorded. And I just really want to quickly show you what I'm even talking about, especially if you are not in a ShapingEDU neighborhood yet and are wondering, what is Sam talking about? What does this all mean? Or if you are in a ShapingEDU neighborhood and you still want to see it, I'm about to share my screen really quick. So this is the ShapingEDU online community. We were able to transform our face-to-face event that we had in April 2018 to even kick off this community. It was our goal to create something that people can engage in year-round around very specific change-making missions. So I mentioned this concept of neighborhoods. Of course, we have our full community, but we also have 10 neighborhoods. Each of the neighborhoods represents an action to shape the future of education. We have people engaged, for example, in the embed data-driven approaches for student success neighborhood, all the way down to building constellations of innovation being a neighborhood. And so I'm really excited to see people in there getting started around their neighborhood charters and missions. If you're not a part of this and want to learn more, you'll be getting information by virtue of having signed up for this session. So I look forward to sharing more with you next Thursday. Okay, next up, one other thing I wanted to share with you, since I'm mentioning lots of recordings. If you're ever looking for a recording of a ShapingEDU live session, such as this one, we've made it YouTube official. I know, it's getting serious. Make sure to search YouTube for ShapingEDU Community and subscribe today. And finally, I shared last time that the next ShapingEDU Unconference, a face-to-face event, will be taking place March 11th through 13th, 2019 in Tempe, Arizona, with the opening reception on the evening of the 11th, and will be ending midday on the 13th. Registration and lodging information will be made available soon on our website and shared out with you by way of email and also in our online community. All right, lots of announcements today, but lots happening. Without further ado, I'd love to kick things off and introduce you to our panelists. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to please briefly introduce who you are, where you're coming from, and your main connection to this notion of building constellations of innovation. So first, we'll start with you, Dave Thomas.
Hello, my name is David Thomas. I'm the Director of Academic Technology here at the University of Colorado, Denver, and Anschutz Medical Campus. I mostly oversee the academic tech and student support, student services technologies, including stuff like, really fascinating tools like business intelligence and CRM. But I've been in the tech game for pretty much my whole career, and I feel less like I'm a master of innovation than a victim of it, but I'm getting better at it, I think, over time. So that's my quick one.
Thanks, Dave. Over to you, Cristiana.
Hi, my name is Cristiana Assumpção in English. I am from Brazil. I just moved here to Boca Raton, so I'm in Florida. But I worked for 30 years in the K-12 sector. I got my master's and doctorate in education technology in '98, but I have been working with technology since '87 when I started. So even before pre-internet, so kind of Jurassic, but I like how David put a victim of technology. Actually, I always had a dream of us trying to get ahead of the technology, and that's what motivated me to go and study it further. So I worked with several things, and I also work with science. So I've worked in the K-12 sector to really try to get the students to, the technology to serve in a way that it would really enhance the learning process. So the dream of changing and getting the students to use the technology productively is more and more necessary. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you so much, Cristiana. Very exciting. And I've had the opportunity to work with Cristiana. We were talking for many, many years back in the day on the Horizon project. Yeah. And she helped us launch the Horizon Brazilian project, and has always been really wonderful at helping us understand the nuances of trends and challenges in Brazil and really greater Latin America.
Yeah.
Angela, tell us all about yourself.
In 2 seconds. Hi, everybody. I'm Angela Gunder. I'm the Director of Instructional Design and Curriculum Development for the Office of Digital Learning at the University of Arizona. I feel like it's like always going through mountains of title and introduction. But basically, we are the production studio that builds all of the fully online degree programs for the University of Arizona. And how I came into this, why I'm part of this conversation, I actually began my career as a webmaster, and I did that for over 15 years. And while I was serving as a webmaster within higher ed, I was doing a lot of instructional design work sort of on the side and working in the periphery. And I didn't know that I was a lone wolf, but I was. And when my career sort of came to instructional design more formally, I found that a lot of people felt like they were lone wolves within this larger industry. And it wasn't so much the issues that we had with technology, but the fact that we were all trying to solve our ubiquitous challenges all by ourselves within silos. And maybe we would have some connections with folks, but they weren't always lasting and sustainable connections. So a lot of the work that my team does is to leverage the connections both across our institution and then beyond our institution, and look at how folks are quite often answering the questions that we're still struggling with, and vice versa. And the only way that we can truly all serve our students better is to look at the way that we can elevate these connections and leverage them.
So well said. And it's important for everyone to not feel like a lone wolf. And so I appreciate people like you. I see you, Angela, and the work that you're doing. That's awesome. So, you know what, since we have such a small group here today for this live part, and I know some of you know each other, but maybe not all. And so I actually think it would be a wonderful idea that we can really open up the conversation. If you're just planning on joining from a listening standpoint, that's okay. You're absolutely still welcome to abstain. but I see Heather in here. Heather, I'd love for you to introduce yourself as well.
I'm driving, so not really.
No problem. We're just happy you're here. Stay safe. Get your.
I am happy to be here too, though.
Awesome. So happy you're here, especially coming at us from the road. I'm super honored that you would join us in your journey. Susan, actually, I'm so glad you're here, Susan, because the whole concept of building constellations of innovation was raised by Susan at the April Unconference in Arizona. And so, Susan, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, but also in your own words, talk a little bit about what your intention was in raising that point.
Okay, can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for doing this. This is great. I've been following, of course, these discussions, and I have joined the discussion boards and had some interesting interactions, so it's been fun to be involved. I think the whole idea of constellations came out of, we were talking about networking, and networking to me always seemed rather closed, that you network with people you know, but constellations are open because we don't even know, we know our constellation, but we don't know about other constellations, and there's real causal connections. And I think some of the problems, some of the reasons, and I've been doing this for a long time, is that we get kind of these echo chambers and talk to each other, but we don't have a real opportunity to reach out and see what others are doing that we can apply to what we do. And I think there's a real strength in that. Mm-hmm. So the area I'm interested in is this whole intergenerational idea of educational technology and just shaping higher education. And partially because I have retired from my role at USC. And it's interesting because I was the person who, when people retired, who I sort of wrote them off. And now being the written off person, I realize there's still a lot to offer and a lot you can do with very fresh eyes, renewed energy, more flexibility, and a certain wise and sageness, I'll say. So I have been doing coaching. I do credentialed coaching, and I still am doing some interesting consulting. And I really want this community, I want to contribute in a way to be that person who is in a different position. You know, a leader who has led through my whole life and now kind of looking back and willing to contribute in new ways and maybe give some advice and learn some new things along the way.
Wonderful. We're really honored and lucky to have someone like you be part of this community. And
of course, the other side of it is just doing anything with Sam and Lev is just, you know, I would always look forward to that opportunity.
Very, very touched. Thank you for joining us today, Susan. Kara, I don't know if you're in a place where you could have audio or video, but I'd love to hear from you. Oh, there you go. Oh, I think you're on mute.
Hey, Sam, it's Lev. I'm just going to chime in while others coordinate. I'm sitting at the Boston airport, ready to get on the plane to go back to Phoenix. I'll listen in as much as I can, and thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, Lev, and thanks for bringing us all together. All right, looks like Kara, you may still be on mute. Oh, there you go.
Now. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. Greetings from Washington, D.C. I used to be a college professor, and now I work for an international nonprofit called World Learning. And when I was teaching at a university, I was doing languages and always was interested in using technology for that. And now I'm designing teacher training programs for the Department of State and doing a lot of education in crisis. And so we need innovation.
Yes. Sign me up, subscribe. I agree. That's really exciting, and I feel like there's a lot that you can definitely contribute as part of this conversation based on what you've learned.
Well, if you feel insular, it's sort of a little bit of a different kind of work setting these days.
Excellent, excellent. And I see a familiar face in here as well. Yuna, I don't know if the Gilmore Girls are still going on in the background, if you're in a place where you can chat.
No, we've moved on to Club Penguin. Hi, everybody.
Hi, Yuna.
Everyone's gonna know my kids are watching by the end of this. Can I just say before we go into introductions, was it Suzanne or Susan who spoke earlier about the importance of intergenerational continuum in education? I heard a story, I think it was NPR the other day, that a lot of folks who have retired are unretiring and going back to the workforce, whether it's because they didn't save enough or because they're just bored. There's this phenomenon now that people are going back to work. And it just occurred to me, like, how do you create onboarding if you're going to do stuff like check the Facebook page or the Twitter? Of course, that's old school now. My kids tell me only old people use Facebook. But, how would you create something onboarding for people who know how to do the job but might not know how to order supplies or all this other stuff? So when you said that, it was just so relevant, I think, to what we're seeing in the workplace now. And at ASU, we have, I think, a vast majority of what we call non-traditional students who come back. So our instructors have to deal with this all the time. So I just thought that was very interesting that you brought it up.
Yeah, I completely agree. I was just thinking about that too. Whenever I have an issue, like I had an issue with Citibank, the other day, I went straight to Twitter because, I know I'm going to get a response within an hour of someone, on who's handling the business's social media to address the issue. So, I liken that to potentially the future of advising, of office hours. Who knows what that might look like in a culture that's responsive in that way based on, trends of new generations.
No, yeah, and it's so funny you say that because I only have a Twitter account to complain. That's all I do with my Twitter account is I'm waiting at the airport or somebody didn't give me good customer service. It's on there.
Yeah, I think my latest tweet has to do with the fact that I made a confession that for all week I've been getting into my car through the passenger door because I saw a spider plunked down. Yeah, on the driver's side. So Twitter is a great place for general complaints. I would agree. All right, we digress. So back on track here. I see Veronica with EDUCAUSE joining us today. Hey, Veronica.
Hi, Sam. Hello from southern Phoenix, I guess you could say, Chandler, Arizona. Lev and I guess, are neighbors. So it's a pleasure to meet you guys.
Awesome. So happy to have you with us today.
Thank you.
And I know Lisa is listening in today, as was Patrice. So no worries. Ruben, if you are in a place with audio and or video, would love to hear from you.
Hi. So let me see if I can get some video going here. There we go. So good afternoon, everyone. Coming in from Nova Scotia, Canada. So here at the conference, which is the Teaching and Learning Above the Line conference, dealing with the intersection of the SAMR model, Universal Design for Learning, and accessibility. So right now I'm in between two meetings relative to the conference, so I decided to duck in for a bit for the session. But I will say that that particular intersection of SAMR, UDL, and accessibility has a lot to do with the subject of equity. And that is a topic for which I'm one of the co-mayors in the community. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of you at least join us there for discussions, conversations, and activities. And as far as what the topic for today is, one of the things I'm very interested in hearing more is the idea of the constellations of innovation. How the networking comes together, how the network makes things possible that weren't possible when everybody's off on their own, and what new possibilities, new developments become available because of it. So looking forward to what people have to say.
Awesome. We're so lucky to have you here today, Ruben. Ruben is, yes. So the ShapingEDU neighborhoods, of course, they have to have officials, so they have mayors. And Ruben is a co-mayor, as he noted, of the Promoting Access and Equity neighborhood. And as I mentioned, we're hosting a online community orientation next week. And so you'll have an opportunity to learn a little bit more And if you're wondering how you can get involved in such a capacity, I'm happy to provide more information. Thank you so much, Ruben. And I think we're good to go. So let's move on to conversations about how we can build constellations of innovation. Of course, we cannot do that without acknowledging some very serious challenges. So I wanted to ask not just the panelists, but really to everyone here. Anyone can chime in. What are the biggest barriers to moving past these islands of innovation into constellations of innovation that you see?
Well, I'd like to tie into what Susan brought and afterwards was worked on, which is bringing in the older people who are retiring and are joining, because actually where I'm working now here at Lynn University, I'm working in a tutoring center where people who are retired don't want to stay home, and they're either professors or they were in the professional world and they want to use their talents to help students with learning disabilities. And so these are kids that come to us that have a lot of learning difficulties. They have some learning disability diagnosed. And it's very interesting because you can see how they experience, and they are using iPads, so they have a lot of help with the accessibility, and you can see the power of the technology in helping these kids overcome a lot of the barriers that they couldn't otherwise even participate in classrooms and graduate. But I think what is interesting is the tying into the community. And I think a huge challenge for that is offering these opportunities for these people to use all of their talent and bring in this talent and have the structure in place for that to happen. You have to have it planned in the schedule. For example, I was in the school back in Brazil. I was in there like 14, 16 hours a day, and it was very hard for you to really, if you don't have something that you plan for and you redesign your curriculum for. So we started redesigning our curriculum for project-based learning and bringing in mentors from different industries and bringing in, so we opened up opportunities that the kids would be required to look for different opportunities to talk to people in different sectors of society. So I think that's the big challenge is, how do you get out of your routine? How do you reshape your routine, your structure, your time, and really make rethink your system, like reboot and rethink your system so that you can tie into all of these different sectors. But then you have to change at all different levels.
I just want to dovetail on that idea of opening up community and establishing community. And I think that that's, one of the first things that needs to happen. And it's certainly a formidable challenge. But one of the other pieces that's a big part of this is that when we think of a constellation, there are bright stars, and there are also some other stars that are glimmering in the background that you can't always pick out so much. And we struggle quite often with hearing from the same voices, but we have a lot of trouble finding and amplifying new voices. And one of the things that I've seen quite often is that imposter syndrome is a real thing that we face within a lot of our communities, and folks don't necessarily feel like they have the ability, the right, the privilege to step up to the microphone and speak and share their mind. Sometimes folks, the way that they want to communicate is not a microphone. And also we tend to sort of cluster into our own orbits. I know that I forget who, somebody mentioned echo chambers before and how we sort of have to fight that. And I agree. I think that we have selection bias where we surround ourselves with folks that that we're used to working with, and maybe we've had some sort of breakthrough with networking or a connection there. But really and truly, if we're trying to foster a community that's built on equity, just as Ruben was talking about, we need to look at folks that have diverse opinions, and sometimes that means encouraging people that might not feel like they belong to step up and to join in.
Yeah, just to add to that, because that really inspired me, is I'm learning more and more that people like to engage and share their voices in different ways. And so as you mentioned, Angela, there's people, whether they're feeling shy or they're not confident yet, if you provide different avenues for contributions, be it, text-based versus video-based versus face-to-face, and engage with people and find them where they are comfortable. You could work with them to pull them out of their comfort zone, but you're kind of got to go where they are first.
Yeah, you have to meet them and then be that kind Sherpa to guide them to the next level. I know for myself, a lot of my colleagues that I've been doing great work with, they're rock stars on Twitter. When you were talking about only using Twitter to complain, I only use Twitter at conferences, and I said, you know what, I need to be intentional about breaking out of this, because there are a lot of great people that are out there that are maybe on my second degree connections, third degree connections, that's a great place for folks to meet. That's a level playing field. So I did have folks that came out and extended a hand and helped me. Some of them didn't know that they were helping me. Actually, Patrice is on this call too, and she's one that helped me on Twitter a whole lot without even knowing it. But then once I took that step out, I was able to find all sorts of other information too. And now I'm doing the same thing with my team and with other colleagues that say, I don't really understand how to use Twitter in this other context, and just outline the benefits and how they might make it applicable. Really simple way to extend the brightness of their constellation.
I think some of these questions about communication, constellations versus networks, silos, communities. I mean, these are the challenges that we're all going to have across every problem space or sharing that we want. What I think is, when you look at innovation, we should be really thoughtful about what we're sharing and what we're not sharing. And something that's really close to home for me is, I think we conflate creativity and innovation. Creativity is the part of the puzzle where you just come up with new ideas. Innovation is applying things and seeing what works. And I think we're terrible at sharing our failures. I think that's one of the pieces of information that's missing in the network. If the constellations are what we see and observe, we're always looking at the brightest stars and we're missing all the dark matter. We need to really understand things that didn't work. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't try again, but I swear, I think that we spend half our time, quote unquote, innovating, repeating other people's mistakes with new toys. And it's fun, but it's kind of wasteful.
Yeah. David, one of my frequent partners in crime, John Stewart at the University of Oklahoma, he said it really well, that we need to build safe spaces for us to be proud of our questions. So not only our failures, but really honing in on the things that we're muddling through, that a lot of times I think the structures that we built within academia don't allow us to be upfront, because it makes us seem like, we don't know what's going on, or we're lesser than, and we do have to put out that information and extend ourselves by being proud of our questions.
Yeah, you bet. Well, a guy, I don't know him, but I've seen him on the internet. Elon Musk has a great quote: "If you're not failing a lot, you're not innovating."
That's right.
And we absolutely flip that around and say, if you're not making a lot of activity, you're not innovating. And that's a mistake, because we need to honor the failure that comes with trying new things.
That's right.
And one thing that I think is really interesting is that another thing we have to be careful about is that in these environments of social media, there's a certain bias that starts to grow. If we're not careful, we're going to be only following people who think like us. So we have to be very purposeful about trying to look for people who come from different sectors. Education can't isolate itself. It has to look at different sectors, people who think differently, to challenge us, to learn the lessons that they learned, so that we can incorporate all of these different points of view as well, and learn how to work with these different perspectives.
Yeah, I'll underline that. That's super important. I mean, again, we over honor these limited successes with really bright, capable people, and then we forget, other people don't have access to the resources, or maybe they're not even comfortable in the environments that we built for them to do these things in. And so innovation's tough. I mean, it can distract you from success sometimes, or meaningful success, diversity, inclusion, equality.
Or have you set metrics for success that are not necessarily the most important?
Yeah, right. A pat on the back from the boss upstairs, or a good article in the campus paper. Yep. I don't mean to be super negative. I think that we gotta just be honest about it at some point in time so that we can learn from each other. I want to know what you screwed up so I don't screw it up.
Well, truth is neutral. This is all neutral.
Love it.
But it's interesting. Oh, sorry. Just one more point. It's interesting that you say that, because one of the things that we were working with the kids in the high school when we would change our curriculum was teaching them how to cope with failure, because they thought that life was all about success and only success is published. I know Facebook is being called now the older generation, but they were all on Facebook or Snapchat or whatever, and people only share the things that work. So that's why I say you have a distorted view of life. And so we were introducing to them, and also even looking at the science and journals and all that. So we only publish what works, but science is built on a lot of failure before you get to the success, but we don't publish that. So we were teaching them how to, when you introduce project-based learning, then they start doing it, they're hands-on, and they begin to fail and they get frustrated. And we were noticing that they didn't have coping mechanisms for that. They were saying, well, why am I not just, born the brightest star in the universe and I'm so illuminated? So it's something that we really have to be careful and watch for, so that we make sure that we're sharing the whole picture and not just this view, this Facebook view of what life is about.
That's really interesting. I think that raises a question about authenticity and feeling like, a community could be seen as insular because everyone's saying the same thing, but are we all saying the same thing because someone else said it and we don't want to feel like outsiders, in the network that we have? How could we be encouraged to, I think, expanding the network makes sense, bringing in different sectors, different voices, of course, but how do we pull maybe hidden voices outside of ourselves and just kind of step out of ourselves a little bit and make sure that we're injecting diversity of viewpoint and thought into our own communities? How are we challenging ourselves as human beings? I think this kind of honestly challenge with social media being a double-edged sword, great for democratizing, sharing and publishing, but also, on the other hand, there's so many articles and so much evidence pointing to how it's driven people into depression and feelings of anxiety and inadequacy. And I think also, Angela, probably contributed to what you noted about the imposter syndrome. So how do we encourage and create cultures that encourage people to that value the individual over the affiliation, so to speak?
I think we have to start by setting really good examples. So this notion of curating a persona on social media and sort of editing out all of the ugly pieces is the antithesis of what David was talking about, where we're actually going to approach this as researchers and scientists, and we're going to document all of the pieces and all of the parts. So if we look at innovation as being driven by storytelling at some level so that we can share all of the pieces and the parts, then we have to be true to the story, and we also have to set good examples. I think we have to put our stories out there and allow people to see themselves in the story, even if it's sort of like the ugly bits that we would traditionally trim out. I think we need to demystify it for folks and say, okay, failure is okay, but failure is part of an iterative cycle where you're actually collecting data, you're learning from those pieces, and then you're revising, you're improving, and you're sharing all of that information with other folks so that they don't necessarily fall into those same traps. So really being open with stories and setting that example for folks.
Angela, I really like what you said there about how failure is an iterative process, because I was thinking of what David said, that really I think that's what we need to do to break those barriers, is to say it's okay that I failed, but then the next step is I failed and then I got up and I tried it again and again. And now I mean, the Wright brothers, right? How many planes did they crash before something stayed in the air? And nobody looks at the Wright brothers and says, God, those guys are big failures, right? Nobody says that, but it's this iterative thing that I think passes a lot of people by. It's whether or not it failed the first time, and if what you have that works at the end is nothing like what you started with, you just kept going. And I don't know, maybe it's time to start a Facebook page on fails that worked or something. And then share stories about, it could be anything, right? It could be from, I tried to make a frittata and the first one burned and now I can make delicious eggs in the oven. I don't know, something like that. But I think it's so important what you and David are both saying. It's okay. It doesn't work now. It might work tomorrow or next month or next year or never. And that's okay too. But
it blows my mind that, we as children, we have that ingrained. That's inherent. Like, we're okay with that sort of iterative cycle. And then somewhere along the way, it's taught out. We fall prey to this notion that, oh my gosh, if we fail, we're going to be punished. But when we're little, we'll persist. And then we get old and we have to relearn it. We pay people lots of money to teach us what iteration is, and then teach our teams what iteration is, when in fact we had it from the get-go.
Wow, that blows my mind. I'm going to share a personal fun fact about myself, because what you said really resonated with me. I have a condition called synesthesia. And I found out about this recently because I just assumed that everyone had it. Because I just assumed, right? Because it was something I was experiencing, and we project. But it's where you kind of conflate two senses, whether it's sight and smell or what have you. And mine is that I see words and letters in very specific colors. So, for example, David, you're always going to be lime green and mustard yellow to me. Angela, you'll always be red and gold. So that's just it's crazy, but that's the way it is. But apparently it's something that a lot of children have and do, but they lose it as they grow up. It's part of creativity. And so, a lot of people who have this condition say, well, I like having this condition. I wouldn't want it to be cured, or I wouldn't want it to go away, because it kind of opens up, a different way of looking at things and visualizing things. And so what can we do to create those within our constellations of innovation? What can we do to create those experiences that continue to spark that childlike wonder and creativity in its participants, and encourage people to let their boundaries down? And you know what I'm saying?
Well, I think there's two things in there. The first thing is, I think that when we think about innovation, it happens inside of a cultural envelope, right? And so if you work in an environment that is not interested in that, doesn't tolerate iteration or failure, well, there's no point in innovating, right? I mean, they're not going to tolerate it. So you need to find a place to go do that. But vice versa, if you're in an environment where you have influence, you really have to nurture that, not just like reward the innovator on your team, but reward grit, reward trying things, reward honest reflection on failure. And I think there's great opportunities for that. And by the way, we have a model. Software figured this out, right? They just said, oh, it's called a bug, right? We debug software. We stopped doing waterfall development methodologies to do Agile. All Agile is doing quick, fast tests to find out what breaks. Not what works, what breaks. Because if it works, we go, okay, keep moving. If it breaks, then now we've found out something and we learned that. But I think that the real trick, though, and this is where culture comes into its own kind of challenge, which is our tendency is to do this, to meet up with people they're very different. I mean, I'm sure Angela and Cristiana and myself have very different backgrounds, but we're kind of like-minded. I mean, we talk about this the same way. If you want real meaningful innovation, I think that you've got to, first of all, diversify the front end. Like, I work at a Hispanic serving institution. Look at me. Like, I don't know what their experience is. I can read about it. But if I'm going to build solutions for these students, they probably should be there at the beginning. They're younger than I am. Their cultural background's different. Their world outlook's different. And they need to be there helping me understand the colors that I don't see. And then I also think that the other piece of this, and then I'll stop talking, is I think we have to think about how we measure innovation. Because if you buy my argument that innovation is applied, creativity is not applied. It's just up here. Cool, neat ideas. Innovation is applied. We need to think about how we measure our outcomes, right? And that goes two ways. One is to measure it as, it's not success or failure, but like, what did we learn that we can put back into iteration? And number two, we have to be really careful how we measure innovation in terms of, I had 20 students, the best students in my program, and I gave them iPads and they all did really well. But interesting. Can you take those 20 iPads down the street to the kids in the underprivileged school? Can you take those 20 iPads to students in a different school or college? I think you got to change your measurements, because then you'll diversify your insight and your outcomes. So front end, back end, and culture all around.
I really like what you said, because one thing we were careful when we were innovating in our curriculum was bringing in the students' voices, because they were the ones who are going to be affected by it. So I think you really have to pay attention to who comes into the conversation and have these new colors. Another fun fact about, there were conferences that I went to, and they invited on purpose a person who was against technology to talk about, to make the counterpoint. When we were talking about technology and innovation, we were all enthusiasts and we were all excited about it. And then comes this guy and says, no, I wouldn't give technology to anyone before they're 20 years old. And it was a great debate. I mean, we had a lot of fun. You know, he made his arguments, we made our arguments. So I think, you know, bring in the different points of view. So I really like the points that you brought. Yeah. And Sam, what color am I?
You're actually purple and pink, and and a little bit of red.
Are these like gradients of color, or are they
somewhat? I'm happy.
Swatches of color.
I'm happy offline to share. I actually recreated in Photoshop like what the alphabet looks like to me and what colors everything is. So I'll share it with you guys later if you're.
That's fantastic.
I'd like to see it.
But
yeah.
One of the things that we face as a difficulty is the struggle between wanting to be innovative and creative but needing to be a production shop. And so, you know, how do you put room in the cycle to iterate and be agile, but at some point, you know, for many of us, we still have to produce something. And so there's that constant tension for us. And then that also prevents us from developing a constellation, because I think for many of us, like our schedules are so full of meetings and things that, you know, we all have like intentions of wanting to engage in things like this, but it becomes almost impossible. And so how do we make space for that and prioritize that?
That's a great point and a great question. And I've actually been wondering something myself. You know, we always talk about amplifying student voice, and certainly in the same vein, faculty voice, and making sure faculty perspectives are included always, of course. But one thing I've noticed or observed over, you know, the course of a few years, not at all specific to any one institution, just seeming to be like a trend I notice, is when people talk about faculty at their institutions and getting faculty involved, there's very much this like undercurrent of like trepidation. Like, make sure you approach it this way, or you know, you sort of have to jump through a lot of hoops to make sure that you have a sufficient amount of faculty engaged. And when you have those faculty engaged, are they just the early adopters, the people that are always going to be engaged in innovation efforts, or are they the more typical profile, which is people who are not early adopters but need to be part of the conversation now? So where I'm all going with this is, how do we kind of like change the perspectives about how we approach faculty commitments and engagement to ensure that we have faculty voice firmly represented in you know, in all these efforts, and are not just connecting them with each other and with other people within their institutions, but with people from industry, other learning sectors like museums and libraries. You know, how can we broaden their perspectives to help transform their teaching practices?
I don't want to lose something that Patrice said in the beginning, because I think it's super important, and we have a lot of conversations like this about innovation, but then we don't flip over to the nuts and bolts of how we do it within our groups, our shops, you name it. And that's being incredibly honest about the cost of innovation. It takes resources quite often, and a lot of times we approach this from this place of ambiguity around, you know, we're just going to explore and find things out, but even the time that it takes to explore needs to be built in. And sometimes the cost is money, but sometimes it's literally the opportunity cost of allowing teams to explore and working that into a meaningful cycle of production, so that they have the ability to test things out and to try things, but they're still honoring all of the responsibilities that they have to build courses, to roll out new technology, all of the things that we're responsible for. And I think that we have this huge disconnect between, we want you to be creative, and David, you were really talking about this from the jump, just be creative, but also like do your job. They don't necessarily have to be on other sides of the spectrum, but we're not closing that gap.
I worry sometimes that we have like this big eye notion of innovation that like it sterilizes the ground level innovation, right? We fund innovation centers and we give people titles, director of innovation, and and then the reality of it is little comes from that practice. I mean, it may be a light on the hill, but what's meaningful innovation? It's that day-to-day stuff where you decide to do something different and it works. That you change someone's mind a little bit and it works. And so I'll tell you, my belief in my department is, and it's a longer story, but I try to build a world where everyone comes to work every day to play, not child play, but to have a looseness in their day that they don't feel like you got a lot of crap to get done, but you still got the room to get it done in a way that makes sense. There's still, when you pack the boxes 100% tight, there's no room to move anything. There needs to be some looseness, some play. And so I think it may come back to the culture of the department. It's not production versus innovation. It's rigidity versus play, and encouraging the small I innovation, which really, let's face it, it's always the little things that we didn't see coming that change the world. It's not usually the thing that everybody said, oh, it's going to be that.
Can I ask you a question, David?
Failed. Yeah. Sorry. Yes.
So, hi, this is Yuna. I heard you earlier talking about, waterfall to agile development. I'm not in IT, but I know of those phrases. I've heard them both within my lifetime, meaning that change happened within the span of my working life. And I'm wondering if you have a perspective or just like a quick thought about how that happened, because it seems like the IT community was able to move to this. Basically what we're trying to talk about, this try it 2-week sprint, do something else, it seems like it's working. That's what happened. How do you think that happened in this whole community, this whole working profession, and can we steal some of that?
That's a great idea. The simple answer is a lot of things, but the main thing is Waterfall didn't work, and then people started to do Agile, and they started like writing software, becoming Google and Amazon, and everybody else went, oh, maybe we should do that instead.
So you think it was just some mavericks that said, I'm just not going to do what you're going to do, and I'm going to do it my way?
Mechanically, it was the rise of the personal computer, so that people could afford, 2 or 3 people could afford computers and they could write software. And, look, we're all old enough to remember Google used to put on email for like years the word beta, right? That was anathema to the old software model. You didn't ship beta code. Everything had to be perfect. And Google's like, it's got bugs. We'll change it. And we got used to it. We forgot the time when you'd get a disk and you'd upload the latest release. We just expect stuff to just be updated and work. Oh, I got the new update on my phone, So I think there's just something about technology that drove that. But I also think it just worked, I mean, there's a lot of mathematical and philosophical reasons for it. But you're right. The only reason I brought that up is I don't think we have to be hopeless about iteration and failure. I think we just have to maybe reframe it, rename it. Don't talk about failure. Maybe talk about iteration. Maybe talk about, maybe we should use bug testing. I don't know. It seems such a friendly way to talk about problems, doesn't it?
One thing that, one thing that worked for us when we were changing, because going back to the question of when our busy schedules, how do we fit that in? And it's exactly what was being said, is that it's so important to schedule in the time to work. It is expensive. So when we innovated our curriculum, we paid the team of teachers to build the curriculum together. So the school was invested in paying 20 teachers 3 hours a week for a year for them to rewrite the curriculum. So it was a huge investment. But one thing going along with what David is saying now is we use design thinking. And that was a great tool to build the team of teachers who had all these different perspectives, because it has the human-centered, it's a human-centered design, and it has empathy, and so it also builds the emotional side of the team. And so when we wrote the curriculum and bringing new ideas, the design thinking was an amazing tool. So it's this quick, and we iterated because we designed, we tested before going to the students. We did the lessons ourselves, saw what worked, what didn't work, but then we brought in students. So by the time we got to the classroom, we already had iterated a few times, and still started with a lot of bugs. I love that that analogy. But you just have to go out and do it. And we were expected to grade the students. We were expected to teach the class. So if you want to bring in innovation, maybe, and that's where we feed in from the other industries, which is what we learned from this fast-paced design process. We have to fit that into reimagine education, reimagine what the school looks like, reimagine what the institution has to look like.
Yeah, I think it's difficult for faculty when you come in and want them to iterate or redesign their class, because there's that tension for them that their priority is research. And if we come in and say, well, like, this is a beta version, or we think this might work, that's scary for faculty, and with good reason, right? They're thinking about, like, well, what impact is this going to have on the student learning experience? And I think you need the right faculty members who can iterate on the fly and try something in one class and say, well, that didn't quite work, so I'm going to iterate and do something different the next time. And if there were ways that we could give faculty more, leave time to focus on things like that, or have different priorities, I think that would help.
The other thing too is that if you look at the life cycle of iteration, it's not just like 2 steps, like we did something and then that's the end. We have the ability to collect a lot of data and move to a point where we feel comfortable opening things up before we actually share them. So it's not just, hey, we're going to test and it's a free-for-all, but it's also not, we're going to wait until this is beautiful and perfect and we're tying a neat bow around it in order to release things. So, giving people the knowledge to figure out where they are in that life cycle too, I think that's really important, and just being really honest and upfront. And I dropped a comment in the chat too. I think that a lot of times we treat things as super precious, and we don't release things to students that might be able to go out to them because we're like, it's not all completely done and perfect, when in actuality we could be presenting students with some of these things that have been tested to a certain extent, but also that we communicate to them, hey, we're working on this, this is a collaboration, we want data from you as we're working through this. So it's not just building in isolation without students and then testing it with students when we think that it's ready for them.
And actually, that's a great partnership for the student to involve the students. They like the responsibility. They enjoy being part of the process, and it takes the weight off the professor too. The load doesn't have to be totally theirs. I mean, they can work together, and it's a great model for the students that we're lifelong learners, and we're going to learn all our lives. So we do it together with them.
Yeah, and I think this is all right on. I mean, you can't really create innovation or have a community around innovation if there isn't a sense of collective ownership. So there's like a psychological effect of bringing people in early, in the beta stage, the alpha stage, or how, functional, early prototype, whatever it is, getting people in early and letting them know, hey, it's going to change and it's going to evolve. We're letting you see everything as it is now so you can help us evolve it. And because we want you to see yourself in the product. Because that's going to breed the best possible usage and efficacy of that product.
That's right. And not to be black hat, this is a neutral statement, but going back to what David said before about culture and building environments, what we're talking about right now for some organizations, for some universities, that's a huge culture shift to move people from this sense that they have to get things right before they put them in front of students, and also that students will be held responsible for things that might break or mess up within that class space. So there's a lot of learning and education and really communication that needs to happen before you can build an environment where that can safely happen. So I don't want to make it seem like we just flip the switch and we're ready to go. We're still struggling in that space, I think.
Something comes out of the chat and what everyone's saying here too is I don't think anybody really wants to be innovated upon, right? I certainly don't think our students are hoping that we think of them as guinea pigs that we can test things on. But I also think I'm a teacher. I mean, I think my classrooms are happy to work with me. They're willing to try something. Especially if I'm willing to admit that it didn't work. So maybe part of our cycle is just our constellations. We need to be a little more planetary, right? We need to think about what's happening on our own little place and make sure those people are a part of us before we look into the cosmos for answers. Although I like constellations, I like that idea.
I love it. I love it. In fact, I don't know how this has happened because I've been having so much fun, but there's 3 minutes left, and I want to make sure we circle back to any concluding remarks. Anything that hasn't been mentioned, any questions that haven't been addressed. Anyone, on this call right now, feel free to give it your last word, and then we'll end it for the day. Final thoughts. Food to leave us to nourish the soul.
I know that David did call us out and say that we are probably quite similar, and we gather in groups like this that are quite similar. But I would just say that things like this, and also conversations like this that lead to people co-working on problems together, are super, super important. So being here is great. I know that my team, they're heavily involved with ID to ID, with EdSurge Loop, and with the FCA Think Tank, and in addition to ShapingEDU. So anything that can bring us together to just work through some problems. I felt like this was less of a panel and more of a co-working session, that we're all leaving with new ideas. I think that that's the most important thing to keeping our constellation right.
I'll double down on that. Angela, I think yes, because I like to pretend like I know what I'm talking about, but I learned so much in the last hour. That's like awesome. So.
I can't believe the time's over. I mean, I think that it's the partnership. Nobody can, we can't do it alone. And I think involving all the players is very important, especially a lot was talked about the structure needed and the support and the vision. So we can't forget the administration as well, the people, the decision makers, because they have an important role in giving us the support, the time, the resources. So I just leave that challenge that we try to bring in everyone at all levels to the conversation, from the technical people, from the people who are, on the floor, down on the ground floor, to all the way up. And it's something that it has to grow together. I mean, that's why, it's the forces that hold us together that will make it work.
Yes. Amen. Any other concluding remarks?
Was great.
All right. Well, then I will do my official sign off and just say thank you to everyone for joining us today. It was a rich discussion. Absolutely. I can't wait to see what unfolds in the virtual Building Constellations of Innovation neighborhood as a result in our online community. I'll post the video there as well of this conversation. The current charge of that neighborhood, by the way, is to devise strategies for extending this community, meaning ShapingEDU, into different facets of higher ed, industry, and beyond to foster opportunity for mutual gain. So artfully vague for people in that neighborhood to kind of ascribe their meaning and bring new dimensions to it. So I look forward to seeing what happens. Details for the October ShapingEDU Live are firming up as we speak, and we'll be sharing and posting details shortly. The topic will be recognizing all forms of learning. So that's about informal learning, micro-credentials, and badges, oh my. So thank you guys again for joining us, for tuning in, and until next time, keep dreaming, doing, and driving.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was joy being here.